Hello, welcome to the programme on this historic day.
The Queen's last journey, people from the southeast head to London, lining the streets to say goodbye.
She's been a servant for us for 70 odd years, and I felt that I had to come up.
Part of history. It's nice to see it and for her to see it.
The region falls silent as the funeral procession is screened to millions, indoors and out.
Farewell from the front room. Families like the Ratcliffes from the Isle of Sheppey gather together to watch a moment in history.
And memories of a much-loved monarch. People's stories of the day they met the Queen and how she put them at ease. Good evening. Shops and schools were shut, businesses closed and roads unusually quiet as people across the region paused to watch the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II.
This evening the Queen will be laid to rest in Windsor, but the day began in London, where people lined the streets to watch the procession.
It's been 70 years since the country has seen tradition and pageantry on such a scale. The last time was the death of the Queen's father, King George VI. Derek Johnson has been speaking to those who wanted to be part of this historic day.
A farewell on an extraordinary scale. So many people, so much love and respect. Some had come from far away, fitting for a monarch of many nations who symbolised our nation for decades and to the very end.
We are originally from Sri Lanka, so she's been in Commonwealth life for so long, and we just want to come and pay respect.
Many, though, are from closer to home.
Your mother and daughter, you've come from Rochester. Why come today?
Just to pay our respects and obviously come to see, the procession.
And just to pay our respects and just to make sure we see everything.
She was my commander-in-chief for my entire military service, so she meant a lot. In the early 90s, I swore my allegiance to her, and that still stands today.
She's been a servant for us for 70 odd years, and I felt that I had to come up.
She's been a complete constant in my life because obviously I've never known a different monarch. So I think she's incredible and wonderful, and I think we were really lucky to have her.
I just thought it'd be nice for part of history. It's nice to see it and for her to see it. So
she's been consistent for years, forever, and I think it's important to pay your respects.
This day of solemn splendour began with the Queen's coffin being taken from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey, carried on the Royal Navy's state gun carriage, drawn by, among others, sailors from HMS Collingwood at Fareham. It's the same carriage used for the Queen's father's funeral, the last royal state funeral, 70 years ago. Inside the Abbey, filled with world leaders and people from all walks of life who met or knew the Queen. A service with hymns and prayers, before silence and the national anthem. And then the long goodbye, the funeral procession. This is pageantry steeped in tradition and history, reflecting the dignity with which Her Majesty's life was measured.
These are some of the lucky ones. They've camped out overnight to get a glimpse, a view of the coffin, the royals, the procession, but for many it's not about actually getting the prime position, it's just about being here in person, seeing out the end of our Elizabethan age, a great and glorious end.
I really respect and love the Queen for all she's done, because I'm also originally from a Commonwealth country, so I'm proud to be from a Commonwealth country, and she did us proud for so many years.
I always loved the royal family and especially the Queen of what she's done, not only for England, for the whole world.
You're very much sort of dressed to impress, and so it's important for you to look smart and be here as well.
Definitely, to pay my respects, most definitely our beloved Queen, may she rest in peace.
She's reigned for 70 years because her Platinum Jubilee has just come, so we wanted to pay our respects to show all of our love to her.
In the final act, the coffin is transferred to a hearse bound for Windsor, the Queen departing London for the very last time, taking with her all that love, leaving behind sadness, but above all, gratitude. Derek Johnson, ITV News, London.
Those heading to London boarded early trains and coaches. Extra services ran overnight and this morning.
Most people, though, chose to stay more local. Some congregated at cathedrals, others watched together on big screens, like at the Carlton Cinema at Westgate-on-Sea, which is where Kit Bradshaw is for us this evening. And Kit, a momentous day for so many people.
Yes, 100 or so chose to watch today's proceedings here on the vast silver screen of this century-old cinema. They sat in these seats in hushed silence, a respectful ritual repeated in front rooms, workplaces, care homes and town squares across the southeast, as my colleague Andrew Pate now reports.
We came together in Hastings to share memories and to pay our respects.
Really good cross-section of people here today, young people with families, teenagers, older people on their own perhaps, and if people want to watch it in detail on the television at home they can, but they won't have that sense of belonging, that sense of community which they're going to get here.
In Gravesend, we came to the Queen's statue, young families, individuals and couples saying a personal goodbye.
I will pay respects to my beautiful Queen.
I'm not English, I'm Australian.
You could say that to your son.
She's still a queen.
Actually, really emotionally overwhelming, because when I just stood there, I don't know what come over me, and I just went, whoa, like, it hit me that I'm never going to see the Queen again.
At sunrise at Ovingdean, we knew we were embarking on a day like no other. For some, they felt they had to be there, catching an early train from Brighton to be in the capital for this historic event.
I just had to go out, just feel the atmosphere instead of sitting at home and watching it.
We're just honoured to be able to have the opportunity to, pay our respects to Her Majesty.
I wouldn't call myself an ardent royalist, but it's to show respect.
I want to say thank you to Queen and to British people.
It meant our normally busy high streets were largely silent. Many of us watching the funeral on a big screen or at home. Our seaside towns thankful and closed to the public as a mark of respect. Some of us offered our thanks and prayers at Canterbury Cathedral, a fitting place considering the Queen's unwavering Christian faith.
I think it was, so obvious of how much her faith not only inspired her, but just gave her the strength that she needed, to do everything she had to do and to face the many challenges that there will have been during the course of her reign.
And for Blind Veterans UK at Ovingdean, the residents said goodbye to the woman they served.
It's the end of an era, isn't it?
Sad, but proud, because what a wonderful send-off for her.
Slightly emotional, obviously, and it was, I thought, a wonderful service, which she possibly had a hand in planning anyway.
Today, we remembered a lifetime of service, and we said thank you.
And the cinema manager here told me they wanted to give people a space to come together as a community to grieve, and it was obviously an opportunity very welcomed by some of the audience members that I spoke to a little earlier.
Today it's a massive occasion
It just felt, being as ex-serviceman as well, you had to do something. You couldn't just sit at home. You had to do something.
To pay the respects to somebody who's done such an amazing job throughout her life and such respect to the country that she's given, and we need to give that respect back as well.
It's a local, beautiful cinema that's probably as old as when she was coronated, so it just seemed fitting.
And there was a striking moment here earlier, something of an echo of a bygone age. As the national anthem started to play at Westminster Abbey, this audience, some hesitantly at first, got to their feet to sing God Save the King. Young and old, family, friends, neighbours, all coming together to salute their late Queen and welcome in their new King. It was a moment one man told me he would never forget.
Kit, for the time being, thank you very much. Well, as the world watched on, 2,000 people were there in person inside Westminster Abbey. They included former Prime Ministers, world leaders and some of the Queen's closest staff, including her ladies-in-waiting.
It was such an emotional service, and Phil Hornby is in Westminster. And Phil, you've been hearing from people who were at the full state funeral.
Yes, Angita, this was the day the people mixed with princes and presidents and politicians from this country, including Britain's longest-serving MP.
I think it's what I call Elizabeth the Faithful would have chosen. In fact, she probably approved of all the arrangements. But to get the equivalent of 150 state visits together, to get all the country's faiths together, to get all the military, the civil service, the voluntary service, public service was amazing. And the real touch was bringing in 200 people who got honours for her during her last year of life. So it brought us together, and I think we ought to try to do what we can to follow her example, do our duty to the end of our lives.
One of those people who got an honour in the birthday honours list and found themselves at the funeral was the South East Director of National Highways.
Well, it was completely incredible. I mean, the music, just the sombre nature of it, it was incredible and a real fitting tribute to our Queen. It was incredible, really amazing.
And I suppose incredible that you got an invitation. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, sometimes you ignore no caller ID, but this time I just happened to answer, and it was a Cabinet Office inviting me to the funeral, which was quite breathtaking, to be honest with you. So I'm just delighted to have been part of it today. Just truly humbling experience, really was.
What was it like sitting in that building? It was obviously the late Queen's funeral, but the Prime Minister was there, the President of the United States, virtually every world leader.
Yeah, that was a little strange, seeing people that you normally only ever see on TV walk straight past you. But I was fine until the bagpipes started at the end, and I have to say it was really emotional, but a really fitting tribute. What a legacy that lady has left us. So yeah, I was just amazed to be part of it.
A day of indelible memories. I suspect all of us will probably remember today, but those people who are at the service definitely will never forget it.
Phil, thank you. Well, as Phil was saying there, like so many other significant royal events, many of us will always remember where we were today and how we watched the Queen's funeral.
Most people chose to watch from home alongside loved ones. We joined three families, the Rose, the Logans and the Ratcliffes from the Isle of Sheppey in Kent, as the nation gathered to say farewell from the front room.
Long before the first formalities began, in kitchens and living rooms, seats were respectfully taken.
Yep, brace yourself, it's going to be emotional.
The build-up watched in awe for its grandeur and precision planning.
So all these visitors have come from all over the world, Bella.
This is what the Queen wanted. Yes. Because she planned all this before her passing. Yes. Yeah.
And as the Queen's coffin emerged, a sobering moment for the nation.
When the coffin arrived, I felt really sad.
The sensation of seeing the crowd, it's mind-blowing.
On the dot of 11, reverence and extraordinary magnitude reached into the homes and hearts of millions.
I think for me the most poignant or moving moment was seeing the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales walking behind the coffin as they entered the Abbey. For such young children to be part of such a massive world event must have been daunting and incredibly moving for me, certainly.
I was very moved, you know, to see them all, because they were mourning for their mother, grandmother, great-grandmother.
I'm just thinking about everybody around the world, you know, sat wherever you are, you know, morning, night, just watching.
Yeah.
The Abbey fell silent. The streets fell silent. The living rooms fell silent too.
Daddy, what do you think the mood of the service was like?
Mood of the service? Well, I think it was really sombre, wasn't it? Very serious, and I could feel a lump in my throat several times, but it was really special.
Yeah.
Despite all the pageantry and everything, I just found myself thinking that this is about one person, and, you know, everything else can be set aside for the affection of one person who did a great job.
A final farewell, too much for some, particularly those who've recently lost loved ones.
We've just recently lost our mother and Mum. Mother, because we're talking about the Queen. Because we know Mum would have loved to have been here, or been there particularly. And so it's been really important, you know, and it was just a no-brainer for us to all come together and do this.
The loyal crowds who watched from behind their own front doors, no less moved than those who lined the streets in person. They too will remember for a lifetime.
I will remember this day forever and ever.
It was magnificent and moving. It pierces through the heart.
You know, you can't regret taking in all that and being, you know, here with all my family, and, you know, we're all going to remember this for a long, long time.
Very moving watching the ceremony today for everybody, of course. Well, just like today's event, the Queen's coronation was also watched by the nation, as well as by a 4-year-old Prince Charles, who will, of course, now have his own coronation.
The silk satin gown the Queen wore at the time was detailed with thousands of pearls, sequins and crystals, with national emblems of Great Britain and the Commonwealth, embroidered in gold and silver thread.
And surprisingly, some of the silk for her clothing came not only from India or China, but from a unique silk farm in Kent, as Sarah Saunders reports.
At her coronation in 1953, Queen Elizabeth wore silk robes. They were made with thread from the country's first and only silk farm at Lullingstone Castle in Kent.
In case you don't recognise them, they're silkworms, and the leaves are from specially grown mulberry trees.
It was founded and run with dedicated passion by Lady Zoe Hartdyke, renowned gardener Tom Hartdyke's paternal grandmother.
Granny was absolutely amazing. She was also completely crackers, I think. She established a silk farm here in 1929. It was a hobby. She was an absolute enthusiast. She was fixated by that metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a cocoon, into a moth, and she loved it. And she used to have, as a youngster, matchboxes full of these caterpillars.
Each will spin over 2 miles of unbroken silk thread round itself for protection whilst changing into a moth.
30 rooms of the house were taken over to breed silkworms. Tom's father vividly recalled the sound of the silkworms and the smell.
Any drawer that Granny could get hold of that would contain these caterpillars, she then fed.
When silk was needed for sections of the Queen's wedding dress and later her coronation robes, of course, the regal commission went to Lady Hartdyke.
As the Queen described, when I met her at Buckingham Palace a few years ago, she said to me, "I'll never forget that mad lady in that big house in Kent." And I said, "Oh, that was my granny, Your Majesty." "I know it was," she said.
From this farm came the silk to make the coronation robes of Her Majesty the Queen, the 2 princesses and many peers and peeresses.
They would send all these entourages down here. Queen Mary was down here in 1936 just to check that it was good enough quality for these amazing occasions. And they looked no further than Granny. They knew that she could produce what was required.
The princess's gown will set a new fashion for brides.
Orders for the design will crowd in from many countries.
We're not in China, we're not in India, who make all the silk. Almost all the world's silk comes from there. We're in Kent, and this amazing lady producing this silk on schedule had to be right. And not just that, the quality had to be exemplary. And it was.
They were all grubbed out after Granny left.
The farm was eventually sold and no longer exists. But Tom was recently given a cutting from one of the original silk farm mulberry trees. He plans to plant it in honour of his grandmother and Her Majesty the Queen.
Not to be and never to be forgotten.
Sarah Saunders, ITV News, Lullingstone.
Everyone has a memory they associate with the Queen, whether that's the Jubilee Street party, the Christmas speech, or the day she came to town.
From her warm smile to the way she made people feel at ease, you've been sharing your stories. And tonight we start with Peter Williams, a filmmaker from Canterbury and one of the first people to interview the Queen back in 1984.
Traditionally, the royal state coach is always drawn by a team of Windsor Greys. The Queen is ensuring that the Muse complement of Windsor Greys is maintained.
We spent a year with her making a film with her, and one of the things she greatly loved, horses.
The Queen rides side saddle, practicing for the only occasion in the year on which she does so.
The equerry to the Queen, whose name was Sir John Miller, said to me, "When I give you the wink, go in and talk to Her Majesty." And I had to pinch myself because I couldn't actually believe that this was what he'd said, because I knew, as well as any journalist, that the Queen never gives interviews. What is this place to you?
Well, it's a village in itself, for one thing. You know, it's a community more than anything else. The horses and the people who look after them, and it's like a small village, which you know belongs to Buckingham Palace.
You must be very proud of them.
Very much indeed, yes.
Watching the film itself, having completed it, I found myself sitting next to Her Majesty. I can tell you that she laughed in the right places, and she clapped a couple of times, and of course we had a long talk and that sort of thing, but of course what she actually said to me I couldn't possibly tell you.
The day I met the Queen was just the best moment probably ever. I remember giving her the flowers, and she said to me, the Queen said to me, "Thank you," and I said to her, "You're welcome." At that moment, I just felt like I was literally buzzing with pride.
Oh, me too. Yeah, me too. So proud of the way that Pippa conducted herself, because the thing with autism is that it's very unpredictable. But she proved a lot to herself, and she proved a lot to us as well. She has a very, very powerful memory, thanks to the kindness of so many people on that day. Going off the timetable, going off the schedule for the day to actually come out, and for a few seconds in history, it was my daughter and the Queen, and I'm so proud.
First time was in 1995 when I was invited to lunch with the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. These are very private occasions. There's no publicity, there are no photographs, there are nothing. It was just the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh wanting to meet their subjects. We had a very nice lunch, and then one of the liverymen brought a little silver box to the Queen's place at the lunch table, and it was treats for the dogs. The dogs were fed from the table, something I've never been allowed to do, or have never allowed anybody to do in my house. The other thing I remember from that day is that one practices curtsying, because curtsying is not something one does every day of the week. So as soon as the Queen approaches, I knew I had to curtsy for the first time. And as she approached, I knew I had to get 1 foot behind and then put my weight forward. That is when I discovered I had 2 left feet. It was so embarrassing for me. I just couldn't go. I sort of bobbed. But the Queen was such a gracious person. She just made it clear she hadn't noticed at all. Of course, I'm sure she'd noticed.
It was a great honour for myself to meet the Queen. She came down to Canterbury Cathedral for Maundy Thursday, and it was very surreal. You're not sure who you're going to meet from the royal family, so Prince Philip went to one side of the room, and Her Majesty the Queen come to, lucky enough, the side that I was standing at, and I was the first person she spoke to. I'll always remember the first question she asks is, where is one from? And because obviously that's not the type of language that I would normally use, so I've always remembered that. So I explained that I was from the borough of Gravesham, and I said that, you know, we work around the county of Kent and to kind of bring communities together. And then she then asked about my parents, and I explained that my parents were, you know, born in India and they come across in the 60s. You know, it wouldn't last more than about 90 seconds, but it's something I treasure to this very day. The key thing I think about Her Majesty is, in death as in life, she has brought the whole community together, brought the whole country together, and that really is her legacy.
Great stories, lifelong memories there of the Queen. Well, the world was invited to watch Her late Majesty's funeral, but her burial at St George's Chapel in Windsor this evening will be a much more private ceremony. Rachel Hepworth is outside the castle for us. Rachel.
Yes, Sangeeta, and the crowds, as you can see, starting to disperse now, but it wasn't so long ago that an estimated 150,000 people were here lining the Long Walk for that historic moment, the Queen's final journey into Windsor Castle and to St George's Chapel. And in just over an hour, those closest to her will gather to say their very final goodbyes as she's laid to rest alongside her beloved husband. It's been really quite an emotional day here in Windsor for the thousands that have gathered to line the route. That funeral procession making its slow and sombre progress down the Long Walk, watched by people who travelled from not just across the region but from across the world, many who'd camped here overnight in order to pay their last respects. And it did feel very much as if the Queen was coming home. This was, after all, one of her favourite places where she spent many happy years. Remember too that today's committal service was attended not just by the Queen's immediate family, but also by those who knew her very well, members of the royal household, past and present, her personal staff, who are now grieving not just for her as a Queen, but also as someone they knew, respected and loved. And at 7:30 tonight, the Queen's coffin will be interred in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, ending the end of 11 days of mourning and, of course, 70 years of that extraordinary reign. And it's very moving that tonight she will at last be next to her husband, Prince Philip, but also to her parents and her sister, Princess Margaret. She'll be there in St George's Chapel, the place that she most wanted to be at the end of her life, with, of course, the people that meant the most to her.
Rachel in Windsor, thank you.
Well, that's it from us on the day the South East said goodbye and thank you to the Queen.
Tonight, in a private family ceremony, Her Majesty will finally be laid to rest alongside her late husband, sister and parents, following her lifetime of service.
Our coverage continues on the ITV Evening News, of course, but for now, from us, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.